The wind cut through the canyon, like a knife dry and sharp, dragging a ribbon of dust behind the woman stumbling along the creek bed. Maria Luz Ortega clutched her daughter tighter against her hip as her son struggled to keep pace beside her, his tiny hand slipping in and out of hers. Her shawl, once wrapped tight, had come loose in the last mile, now flapping like a torn flag in the wind. The hem of her skirt was caked in red dirt. Her boots, thin-soled and borrowed from the dead, bled through at the toes. Almost there, she whispered, though she didn't know if that was true. Her voice cracked, barely audible, above the rush of blood in her ears and the dry whimpering of Isela half asleep against her shoulder. Tomas didn't answer. He was 4 years old and already looked older than he should. Dust clung to his face like paint. His lips were cracked. He hadn't cried, not once, even when they slept under a juniper tree 2 nights ago, with nothing but her threadbare shawl to cover them. He walked like a soldier. The shack came into view just past a bend in the creek, half swallowed by weeds, roof-sagging door hanging open. She hadn't seen it in 6 years, not since her husband helped harvest cattle on this land. It looked worse than she remembered, like something left behind on purpose. Still, her knees gave out in relief. They crossed the dry creek and scrambled up the low bank. A rusted horseshoe lay in the dirt near the stoop, a twisted tin cup half buried in the dust. No one had touched this place in years. She set Isela down gently on a flat patch of packed earth and pulled open the door. It gave way with a moan. Inside was one room, dim and thick with the smell of mice and mold. But it had 4 walls, a roof, a chimney. She pressed her hand to the frame and breathed in the silence like a sacrament. "We're staying," she told them. "For now, we're staying." Tomas looked up at her, and for the first time in days his expression cracked. "Really, Mama?" She nodded. "Sí, mijo. Just for a little while." By dusk, Maria had cleared enough space to lay the children on a bundle of dry grass she'd cut from the edge of the creek. She found an old tin pot in the corner, dented but usable. With it, she fetched water from the nearest trickle in the creek bed and boiled it over a fire she built from brush and broken chair legs. The smoke stung her eyes, but it felt like warmth, like hope. She chewed a piece of raw mesquite bark while the children sipped weak broth made from wild onion and river salt. Tomas fell asleep mid-chew, curled around his sister like a dog guarding his den. Isela's face was smudged and soft in sleep, mouth parted slightly, lashes resting on her cheeks like feathers. Maria sat with her knees to her chest, watching the fire dance in the hearth. Her bones ached. Her belly ached more. She hadn't planned to become a criminal, but the world had offered no other path. Her husband Ignacio had died 5 months back, a wagon accident in the canyon. Left her with 2 mouths to feed, debt at the mercantile, and whispers in town that a widow without land or name wasn't far from begging. Or worse. She tried the church. She tried cleaning houses. She tried staying quiet while ranch hands cornered her near the feed barn. In the end, it was Abuela Natividad who told her, "There's still a shack out on Dry Creek. No one's touched it since the old foreman died. Maybe the land has forgotten it. Maybe God has too." And so here she was, sitting in stolen silence. She stood to check the shutters. The one window had no glass, just a crooked wood panel she could pull closed with twine. The door didn't latch, but she pushed a heavy stone against it. She didn't expect visitors, not here, not tonight, but she'd lived long enough to know not to count on peace. Before lying down, she stepped outside. The wind had died. Stars blinked coldly above the cliffs. The sky stretched wide and uncaring. Somewhere in the distance, an owl called out low and steady. A wolf answered. Then she saw it. A faint, thin plume of smoke rising from her chimney, curling straight into the sky. A dark line against the stars. Her blood turned to ice. She hadn't thought of the smoke. Out here, fires weren't common. Most ranch hands cooked over coals or ate cold bread. And this shack sat low, hidden from the main trail. But the wind had shifted. The smoke now pointed due north toward the heart of the ranch, toward whoever still owned this land. She stepped back inside, quickly pulled the panel across the window, and sat beside her children with her heart pounding loud enough to shake the floor. They wouldn't come tonight. No one would ride this far after dark. That's what she told herself as she lay on the dirt floor, arm curled around both children. But her stomach turned with unease. If they saw the smoke, they'd come tomorrow. If they came, what would she say? Would they let her stay? Would they take her children? Sleep didn't come. Only the crackle of dying embers and the slow, steady breath of two small bodies that trusted her to make the world right again. She closed her eyes and prayed without words, not to be rescued, not even to be forgiven, only not to be found. Not yet. Not until she could think of something better than running again. She doesn't look like a thief. She looks like a woman holding up the sky with her bare hands. Elias Romero. The morning sun broke over the red mesas, like fire spilling across stone. James Callahan stood on the back porch of the main house, a tin mug cooling in his hand, the wind tugging at his collar. The scent of mesquite smoke drifted faintly from the north pasture, out of place, subtle, but enough to catch his attention. He didn't move right away, just stared out toward the horizon, narrowing his eyes against the haze. That shack should have stayed empty. Hell, it should have crumbled by now. Elias, he called without turning his head. Bootsteps answered from the barn. Elias Romero appeared, brushing hay from his shirt, a quiet steadiness in his gait that James had always appreciated. "Didn't figure you'd be up this early, boss," Elias said. James handed him the mug untouched. Smoke. North edge. Could be kids, maybe squatters. Elias raised an eyebrow. Shack by Dry Creek. That's the one. "Hadn't thought about that place in years," Elias muttered, taking a sip. "You want me to check it out?" James gave a nod. "Go light. No rifle. If it's a family, I don't want blood in the dirt. Just eyes." Elias set the mug down on the porch rail. "I'll ride quiet. Won't be seen if I don't want to." James watched him saddle up the old chestnut mare, whinnying softly. The ranch was already humming. Hands heading to the cattle pens, smoke from the kitchen chimney curling into the sky. But all he could think about was that thin gray line floating where it shouldn't be. Some things that are gone should stay gone. Elias rode out at a slow pace, avoiding the main trail. He knew these paths like a map folded into his bones. Years spent riding fence-clearing coyotes, bringing in lost calves, had taught him how the land breathed. And today it breathed something new. He tied the mare to a pinon tree a quarter-mile out and approached on foot boots, soft on the red earth. From behind the brush he spotted movement. A small girl, barefoot, tangled hair, squatting near the creek, scooping water into a tin bowl. A boy, maybe 4 or 5, was stacking flat stones in the sun. Their clothes were worn thin as paper. The girl sang under her breath a lullaby that sounded older than the hills. Then he saw her. She stepped out of the shack, carrying a bundle of washed clothes tied in rough twine. She walked slowly, deliberately, as if each step cost something. Her shawl was pulled tight, but her face was sharp and alert, eyes scanning the sky like it might fall. She didn't see him. Elias crouched lower, heart tight. He should report this. but something about the way she moved, the way her hands cradled the basket, the way she knelt beside the children, fingers brushing the girl's cheek, made him hesitate. This wasn't some vagrant come to steal wire or chickens. This was a woman surviving with nothing. He waited until she went back inside, then crept back to his horse and turned for home. James was brushing down one of the draft horses when Elias returned, just before noon dust in his beard and a furrow in his brow. "Well?" James asked. Elias dismounted and tied the mare with a jerkier pull than usual. "It's a woman. Genizaro by the look. Early 30s, maybe. She's got 2 little ones, twins, boy and girl. No sign of a man, no livestock, barely any belongings." James leaned against the rail, arms folded. "Did she see you know?" James let the silence stretch. "You sure she's not trouble?" "She ain't trouble. She's just tired, worn down to the bone. But she's making a home of it best she can." Elias met his eyes. "She doesn't look like a thief. She looks like a woman holding up the sky with her bare hands." James looked past him toward the north. A gust of wind lifted his hat brim. "You think she'll stay? I think she don't have anywhere else to go." He didn't respond, just stared hard at the horizon until Elias added, "Could be a mercy to let her be. Ain't like that shack's doing you any good." James turned and walked back toward the barn. Or it could be a problem waiting to happen. That night, James didn't sleep. He sat in the study glass of rye untouched on the desk, the lamp casting long shadows over the empty nursery door across the hall. He hadn't opened it in 3 years. Not since Victoria had died, screaming his name, and the babies, both of them, followed her into the dirt. Now a stranger lived in the last corner of the ranch, where something good had almost begun. Part of him wanted her gone. Another part, that the one he didn't let speak, often wondered what kind of woman would choose that broken place as a sanctuary. By dawn, he had made up his mind. Maria was boiling a pot of water over the low fire when she heard the sound. Horse hooves. Steady. Close. She froze. Tomas sat up on the bedding, eyes wide. Isela clutched her mother's leg. The fire crackled. Outside, boots hit the ground. A knock came. Not hard. Not gentle either. She stood slowly brushing soot from her skirt. Her hands trembled as she reached for the door. A tall man stood in the frame, shadowed by the morning sun. Wide-brim hat. Dusty coat. Hard mouth. Eyes that had forgotten softness. "Name's Callahan," he said. "This here's my land." Maria's throat locked. She stepped in front of the children. "Please," she whispered. "Just give us until tomorrow." Callahan didn't blink. "I ain't here to drag you out. Not yet." He scanned the room, the children, the makeshift bedding, the patched shawl hanging near the window. "I just wanted to see what kind of squatter had the nerve to light a fire on my land." Maria's jaw tightened. "I didn't mean to be seen." "Well, you were." He stepped back, letting the silence stretch between them. Then, to her surprise, he reached into his coat and pulled out a small cloth bag. He tossed it onto the stoop. "Flour. Some beans. Next time, ask before you settle." He turned and mounted his horse. "You've got 3 days." Then he was gone, leaving behind a trail of hoof prints, a cloud of dust, and a woman too stunned to move. Tomas reached for the bag. "Mama." Maria sank to her knees beside her children, her hand on her heart. 3 days. 3 days was more than she'd dared hope for. "I ain't come to beg, sir. I came to survive. But if you'll give me just one more night, I'll leave with the dawn." The dust from Callahan's horse had barely settled when Maria closed the door behind her. The shack felt smaller now, like the air had thinned, pressing hard against her chest. Her hands trembled as she picked up the bag of flour and beans he'd tossed to the step. It was heavier than it looked, more food than they'd had in days. She didn't trust the gift. She set it down gently on the table, if the crooked plank of wood by the window could be called that, and turned to her children. Tomas stared at the closed door, his small shoulders tense. Isela clung to the hem of Maria's skirt, hiding her face. "It's all right," Maria said, her voice low, steady. "We still have time." She didn't know if that was true. 3 days. That's what he'd said. She'd learned enough in her life to know men with land didn't always mean what they said, especially when they said it with cold eyes and gravel in their voice. He could change his mind by sundown, could send the sheriff, could come back himself this time with rope or worse. But for now, he was gone, and she had food. She made a small fire, measured the flour like it was gold, and mixed it with water and salt to make thin cakes. She cooked them on a flat rock over the fire, flipping them with her fingers. The children sat close, silent, watching her every move. They ate slowly, chewing each bite like it might vanish if they weren't careful. When they were finished, Maria tucked them back into their nest of old clothes and straw, then stepped outside. The sky was blue and hot and unkind. A vulture circled high overhead. She walked the edge of the creek, following the bend to where the water pooled shallow against the rocks. The same stones Ignacio had once crossed when he'd brought her here with a smile and a stolen apple in his pocket. He'd told her the shack could be made livable. A coat of paint and some prayers, he'd said. We could have a garden right here. They'd never gotten the chance. Now she stood alone, watching the wind stir the tall grass. Her fingers tightened around the edge of her shawl. She should leave. Walk into the hills and find another place. But with 2 small children, and no horse, no money, no allies, every road was just a longer way to starve. No, not yet. Not while they had food and shade and a roof, however broken. She would make it to 3 days, and maybe more. Maybe he would forget. Maybe. James Callahan didn't forget. He sat on the edge of the porch that evening, one boot tapping against the floorboards, staring out across the valley. The ranch stretched in every direction, fields, pastures, lines of fencing, and it had never felt so far from him. Elias walked up with his hat in his hand, sweat on his collar. "She's still there?" James asked, though he already knew. "She is," Elias said. "Fixed the shutter on the west wall. Laid stones out by the door. Looks like she means to stay." James didn't answer. Elias squinted toward the horizon. "You want her out, say the word. But I've seen all kinds of people pass through this land, boss. Drifters, troublemakers, crooks. She's none of that." "She's on my land," James said. "She's trying to survive," Elias replied. "So were we once." James looked up sharply. Elias shrugged. "A man forgets hunger if his table stays full long enough." James stood and walked inside without another word. The next day, Maria didn't wait for the knock. She heard the horse before the sun had fully risen. She opened the door with her shoulders squared, her hands empty. James Callahan sat tall in the saddle, the reins loose in his gloved hands. His face was unreadable. He looked down at her with that same stillness she'd seen before, the kind of silence that wrapped around a man like armor. "I told you 3 days," he said. She nodded. "You did." He waited. "And I ain't come to beg, sir," she said, her voice steady. "I came to survive. But if you'll give me just one more night, I'll leave with the dawn." She didn't tremble when she said it. Didn't cry. Callahan looked past her into the dim room where the children still slept curled around each other like kittens. He looked at the rough curtains, the swept floor, the way she'd stacked the stones neatly at the door. He saw the line of wild herbs growing beside the wall, the empty tin pots soaking in clean water. "You from San Miguel?" he asked. "I was," she said. "Not anymore." "What happened to their father dead?" Her voice caught just once. 6 months. Wagon tipped on Devil's Road. Callahan nodded slowly. "And no kin, none that'll help us." He sat there for another long breath, then dismounted. The creak of leather and the thud of his boots on the earth made her heart beat louder in her chest. He walked past her slow, as if inspecting the place. He touched the doorframe, ran a hand along the edge of the broken windowsill. "I expected worse," he muttered. "I clean. I see that." He turned and looked at her. Ulau looked for the first time. She met his gaze without flinching. "What's your name?" he asked. "Maria Luz Ortega." "Well, Miss Ortega," he said, stepping back toward his horse, "you can have more than one night." Relief bloomed in her chest, so sharp it hurt. "But this can't go on forever," he added. "This is a working ranch. I've got laws and neighbors and a family that already thinks I'm half mad." "I understand." "I'll bring more supplies," he said. "Food, soap, maybe a pair of shoes for the boy." She opened her mouth to speak, but he held up a hand. "Don't thank me. Not yet." Then he was gone, dust rising behind him like a curtain falling. That night, Maria sat beside the fire, while her children slept, watching the flames curl around the pot. She still didn't trust him, but he hadn't lied, and he hadn't turned her out. She'd take that. For now. The wind shifted, and for the first time she didn't look up to see if the smoke was giving her away. In the morning she would gather wood, wash the children's clothes, fix the lean of the front door. If she was going to be watched, she would be seen standing tall. This ain't just surviving Maria Luz. This is claiming ground. Abuela Natividad, the morning came soft with the hush of a warm breeze and the low murmur of bees drifting through wild sunflowers. Maria rose early, her shawl wrapped tight, the fabric already damp with dew. The children were still asleep, their limbs tangled beneath the patched quilt faces, relaxed for once. She stepped outside, a worn tin bucket swinging at her side. The creek water was cold even in summer, and she rinsed their clothes one by one, scrubbing the fabric against flat stones while the sun crept higher. The rhythm of her hands brought a strange peace, rough, cotton-cool water, the scrape of cloth against rock. It reminded her of when life made sense. When Ignacio came home at dusk, smelling like leather and cattle, his smile crooked his hands full of warmth. Now she worked in silence, fighting the ache behind her ribs. When the wash was done, she hung the clothes between two pinon trees, using a rope she'd knotted from shredded skirt hems. The line sagged in the middle, but it held. Shirts fluttered. A child's sock twisted in the wind. Maria stepped back and studied the small clearing. The shack, once sagging, now stood straighter, its frame patched with gathered wood and a few boards Elias had quietly left by the creek. The front stoop was swept clean. She'd planted wild mint and yarrow by the stones out front, a makeshift herb bed already beginning to sprout. Survival wasn't enough anymore. She was shaping something, even if it didn't last. A rustle in the brush made her turn sharp and quick. Her hand flew to the small knife tucked into her waistband, but it was no threat. The old woman emerged like a spirit from the juniper shadows, barefoot, skirts dusted with pollen, her silver hair braided tight down her back. Abuela Natividad carried a bundle wrapped in faded fabric, and a crooked walking stick made from mesquite wood. Maria exhaled and lowered the blade. "I was starting to think the wind took you," Maria said. Abuela gave her a dry chuckle. "No, niña. Just waiting for you to stop looking over your shoulder." She stepped into the yard like she'd never left, placing the bundle on a flat stone. Inside were dried corn husks, beans, 2 hard rolls, and a pouch of powdered chile. Maria stared at it, throat thickening. "I told you I didn't want. And I told you that pride doesn't feed children." Maria closed her mouth. Abuela sat slowly, leaning on her stick, and surveyed the small patch of land. "You've done more with this place in 2 weeks than most men do with a homestead in 2 years. Maria dropped to a crouch beside her, brushing grit from her skirt. "Still doesn't belong to me." Abuela glanced at the shack, then at the children watching from the doorway. "Doesn't matter who the papers say owns it. You've put your hands in the dirt. Laid roots. That's what counts. This ain't just surviving Maria Luz. This is claiming ground." Maria looked down at her calloused palms. "What if he comes back tomorrow and tells me to go, then you leave with your head up? And you take the knowing with you that you made something out of nothing. Again." They sat in silence as the wind rustled the cottonwoods. Abuela turned her gaze toward the trees. "That rancher, Callahan." "He trouble?" Maria shook her head. "Not yet." "Men like him, they carry ghosts," Abuela muttered. "You can see it in their eyes. Something buried deep and left to rot. You be careful, niña. He hasn't touched us. He brings food." Abuela snorted. "A wolf can bring meat too. Doesn't mean he won't bite later." Maria let the warning settle. She couldn't argue with it. But neither could she ignore the feeling that Callahan's silence was different than most. It wasn't hunger or cruelty. It was distance. Like he was walking behind glass and didn't know how to break through. The children ran out to greet Abuela, tumbling into her lap, their chatter spilling over each other. She smiled, pulled a bundle of dried fruit from her skirt, and began handing out pieces with wrinkled fingers. Maria stood wiping her hands on her apron. She watched the 3 of them, old, young, and somewhere in between, and felt something flicker deep in her chest. Not joy. Not yet. But the start of something like hope. At the big house, James sat at his desk, staring at the deed book he hadn't touched in months. The ink bled where his hand had paused too long. He pushed it away and looked out the window. Elias leaned against the fence outside, polishing a bridle. James tapped on the glass and motioned him in. "You been by the shack this morning? And she's made a garden." James blinked. "A garden mint. Yarrow. Looks like she's boiling the leaves for medicine, or maybe tea. Kid's got fewer coughs. Place is looking more like a home than a ruin." James rubbed the back of his neck. Elias hesitated. "You gonna run her off? She's still working from that shack like she owns it." "She's not stealing. She's making it livable." James stared at his hands. The scars along his knuckles. The cut that never healed right from the fencing wire 2 winters back. "She's raising children there, Elias. On my land. That puts my name on them." Elias shrugged. "And what would be so bad about that?" James said nothing. That evening, Maria sat on the porch step while the children drew in the dirt with sticks. She'd boiled the chili powder into a broth and poured it over the beans. The smell reminded her of home, of long-ago laughter, and evenings spent singing with her mother. She hadn't sung since Ignacio died. She pulled a piece of twine from her pocket and began knotting it into a bracelet, just something for Tomas to wear around his wrist, a charm against bad dreams. A noise behind her made her turn. Callahan stood a few feet away, holding a burlap sack. His shadow stretched long in the fading sun. He didn't say anything, just handed it over. Inside were potatoes, a tin of lard, a small jar of sugar, and she stared a single lemon. She looked up, startled. "Where did you storehouse?" he said. "Figured the girl might like it." Isela peeked out from behind the door, eyes wide. "She's never tasted one," Maria said. Callahan rubbed his jaw. "Well, she ought to." He turned to go, then paused. "You'll be needing soap next. I'll bring it in the morning." Then he left, not waiting for thanks. Maria stood still, the lemon cradled in her palm, like it was something sacred. Tomas came over, tugged at her skirt. "Mama, what's that?" She smiled faintly. Something new. As the sun dipped behind the cliffs and the air cooled, Maria sat on the stoop, peeling the lemon slowly, the scent bright and sharp in the dry air. Tomorrow she would plant more herbs, and wait to see if the man who brought lemons might also bring something else. "I buried 3 graves in one day. Since then, I've kept every door closed." James Callahan, the children's laughter echoed off the creek bed, bright and reckless. Tomas and Isela were playing with stones near the edge of the shack, stacking them into crooked towers and knocking them down with triumphant cries. Maria watched from the doorway, a bowl of soaked beans in her lap, her fingers sorting the good from the bad, with quiet precision. It had been nearly 3 weeks since Callahan first brought food. Since then he'd returned twice more, never speaking long, never stepping fully into her space, but always leaving something behind. Soap, rice, a small dented tin of coffee that she still hadn't dared open. He didn't ask questions, and she didn't offer answers. That morning after hanging the laundry, Maria had begun digging behind the shack, loosening the hard clay to plant the seeds Abuela had brought last week, squash chile and beans wrapped in dry paper and tied with string. The soil was stubborn, the kind that didn't want to be tamed. But Maria had grown up in worse. Her hands were deep in the earth when she hit something. Not stone, not root. Something small and hollow with the thump of old wood. She paused, dug carefully. The sun shifted behind a passing cloud as she scraped away the dirt, revealing a narrow wooden box stained black with time. It was no more than a foot long. She brushed it clean and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled in a faded blue cloth, was a baby's rattle, wooden carved by hand. The edges were smooth from wear, the handle wrapped in thin rotted ribbon. A small brass bell clinked softly inside. Maria stared at it, heart slowing. It didn't belong to her. It didn't belong to her children. And it had been buried deliberately. She stood slowly, wiping her hands on her apron, and looked toward the distant ranch house rising like a shadow against the slope. Her mind spun quietly, piecing together a puzzle she hadn't known existed. Elias found James in the barn, saddle oil on his hands, wiping down an old leather strap that didn't need cleaning. "You hear the widow found the box?" Elias asked, voice low. James didn't look up. "What box?" "You know damn well which one." The rag paused. "She say anything, no, but she'll come. She's got eyes." James dropped the strap onto the work table. His voice, when it came, was quiet and dry. "I buried 3 graves in one day, Elias. Since then, I've kept every door closed." Elias didn't respond right away. He leaned against the wall and crossed his arms. "I know that. But maybe she's not here to open all of them. Maybe she's just trying to find her own." Maria didn't go to the house that day. She set the rattle back in the box and reburied it under the tree behind the shack, marking the spot with 3 small stones. Not to forget it, just to respect it. That night, when the fire burned low and the children were asleep, She sat on the porch with a cup of warm water and thought of Ignacio, of the way he used to hum when he carved toys out of spare wood, of how he'd wanted a big family, a piece of land, something they could pass down. He'd died before any of it came true. She looked out into the night toward the ranch house and wondered how many other dreams had ended in silence. James waited until the next evening before riding down. He found her kneeling beside her herb patch, tending to the mint. The sun was low, casting long shadows through the cottonwoods. She stood as he approached, brushing soil from her palms. "You found it," he said. She didn't ask what he meant. "I didn't touch it," she said. "Didn't feel right." He nodded. "It was meant to stay buried." She hesitated, then asked, "Yours?" He looked past her toward the line of hills beyond the shack. "My wife, Victoria. Lost her 3 winters ago. Twins. Boys." Maria's throat tightened. She didn't speak. James took off his hat and rubbed his brow. "We used to come here. When the house felt too full of talk and pressure. She liked the quiet. Said the creek sounded like music if you listened long enough." He let out a slow breath. "When the fever took her, she was 6 months along. They tried to save the babies. All 3 of them gone in a day." Maria closed her eyes. James's voice dropped. "I brought the rattle down a week after. Meant to burn it. Couldn't. So I buried it instead." She looked at him then, not as the man with power over her roof and food, but as someone broken in a way she understood. "I'm sorry," she said softly. He nodded once. "Me too." The silence between them wasn't heavy, just old. After a while, he gestured toward the shack. "You've done more with this place than I thought possible." She gave a faint smile. "Wasn't hard to improve it." That almost made him laugh. He looked down at the herb bed. "What are you growing, mint?" "Yarrow. A few things for coughs. Kids always seem to catch something." James studied the plants. "You know your way around remedies, some." "My grandmother taught me. My husband used to say I could cure a mule of pride if I had enough garlic." This time he did laugh. A short, rusty sound. Maria tilted her head. "You ever open that nursery?" His smile faded. "Not since." She didn't press him. Only said might be time to open a window. Let the dust out. He nodded, but didn't answer. The next morning, Maria woke to the sound of boots on gravel. She opened the door to find a basket on the stoop. Inside, dried tobacco, 2 candles, a folded shirt in Tomas's size, and a small wrapped bundle that turned out to be seeds, beans, corn, and squash. There was no note. She stepped outside, scanning the horizon, but saw no one. Later that afternoon, Abuela returned, walking slowly with a basket of her own. "I heard you stirred the past," she said. Maria smiled faintly. It stirred itself. Abuela sat and watched the children play in the dirt. Good. That house needed ghosts aired out. As the shadows lengthened, Maria knelt in the garden, planting the new seeds in long, careful rows. The soil still resisted, but she worked through it, knowing not everything good starts easy. When she stood brushing dirt from her knees, she looked up toward the big house on the hill. The nursery windows were still shut, but a curtain had been drawn back. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She's not just living out there, James. She's rebuilding something. Something you lost and don't know how to ask for. Elias Romero. The first light hit the valley like a slow, waking breath. Maria stood at the stove, a flat iron plate Elias had brought from the barn, flipping corn cakes over the fire, while Isela hummed nearby, dressing her rag doll in a scrap of blue ribbon. Tomas sat on the floor by the open doorway, tracing letters in the dirt with a stick. The shack, once hollow and cold, now buzzed quietly in the mornings. The air smelled of firewood and crushed mint. Even the silence felt different, not empty but settled, rooted. She poured warm milk into 2 tin cups, setting them in front of the children, just as a shadow passed by the window. A soft knock followed. When she opened the door, Elias Romero stood there, holding a small wooden box and a crooked grin. "Boss sent this down," he said. "Said it's time you stopped living like ghosts." Maria wiped her hands on her apron. "What is it?" "Drawer handles, hinges, some oil for the door, couple of nails." She raised an eyebrow. Elias shrugged. "Man can't bring tools himself, I guess." "Not yet." She stepped aside to let him in, and he set the box near the hearth. His eyes scanned the room with quiet interest. The smoothed floor, the tidy bedding, the strips of wild herbs drying near the chimney. "Didn't think anyone could make this place look like a home again," he said. "It's not much," Maria replied. "It's more than most." Tomas had stood by the door watching. Elias crouched to his level. "You like horses?" Chico Tomas nodded shyly. "I got one with a temper, needs someone brave to feed him apples without losing a finger. Think you're up for it?" The boy grinned. Maria gave a slow nod. "Just don't let him come back missing any fingers." Elias rose, offering her a rare, honest look. "He's watching, you know," he said quietly. She frowned. "Callahan. Doesn't come down, doesn't say much. But he's watching every corner of this place like it's holding its breath." Maria lowered her voice. "And what does he want?" Elias shrugged. "That's the thing. I don't think he knows yet. But I do know this, he's not just letting you stay out of charity." She turned her gaze to the creek. "Then what?" "He's trying to remember how to feel human again. And you're teaching him whether you mean to or not." Later that day, Maria walked the children up the hill to the edge of the corral. Elias had invited them to see the horses, and Tomas hadn't stopped talking about it since breakfast. James wasn't in sight when they arrived. Just Elias, who nodded from the far fence post, motioning Tomas over to a dappled gray gelding with a white blaze down its nose. Maria kept her distance, holding Isela's hand. She watched as Elias lifted Tomas over the fence, showing him how to hold out a slice of apple without flinching. The horse leaned forward, lips brushing the boy's hand, and Tomas squealed with delight. It was the first time she'd heard him laugh like that in months. James stepped out of the barn just as Isela pointed at him. He froze mid-step, then slowly approached, tugging his gloves off. "Didn't expect you up this far," he said. "Elias invited the children," Maria answered. "I came to keep them in one piece." His eyes flicked to the children, then back to her. "They're good kids. They've had to be." He seemed to chew on that, then asked, "You ever break a horse?" She blinked. "No." He nodded toward the corral. "Most people think you do it with force, ropes, fear. But the best way's quieter. You wait till the horse figures out it can trust you. Then you don't have to break it. Just walk beside it till it chooses to stay." Maria looked at him. "That true for people too?" He met her gaze, something unreadable in his face. "Sometimes." A long pause stretched between them. The wind kicked up dust along the fence line. James cleared his throat. "Elias says you've got a good hand with herbs. Enough to get by. I've got an old horse with a bad leg. Thought maybe you could take a look." She nodded. "I can try." They walked in silence to the stable. It wasn't the awkward kind of silence, more like two people who'd learned not to waste words. The horse stood in the last stall, an old sorrel mare with a clouded left eye and a limp that worsened in the cold. Maria ran her hands gently down the leg, feeling for heat swelling. The mare flinched but didn't bolt. "Looks like the joint's inflamed," she said. "I can make a poultice comfrey and mullein. Might help ease the pain." James leaned on the stall door. "You always this calm around animals, only the ones with soft eyes and loud hearts." He smiled faintly. "That's so." She stood brushing hay from her skirt. "You got a kettle in that big house of yours, couple. I'll need boiling water. And time." He nodded. "You'll have both." That night, after the children had gone to bed, Maria sat by the fire mixing crushed herbs into a thick salve. The scent of pine and ash filled the room. She thought about the horses, about the way Tomas had laughed, about the way Callahan's voice had softened just for a moment. She didn't trust it, not yet. But it didn't feel like danger. It felt like something beginning. James stood at the window of the nursery, the shutters half open. The room still smelled faintly of lavender and dust. The cradle hadn't been touched. The rocking chair hadn't moved in 3 years. He looked down the hill where a faint line of smoke curled from the chimney of the shack. Elias stepped into the doorway behind him. "You gonna keep hiding up here like a ghost?" Elias asked. James didn't turn around. "You think I'm playing at something. I think you're remembering how to be a man with a heart." James exhaled. "It's been a long time." Elias leaned against the doorframe. "She's not just living out there, James. She's rebuilding something. Something you lost and don't know how to ask for." James looked down at the shadows stretching across the pasture, at the way the smoke rose steady and true. "She won't stay," he said. "Maybe not," Elias replied. "But what if she would?" James didn't answer. He only watched the smoke, and hoped it didn't vanish before he found the words. "Sometimes all a man has left to give is the truth he never dared speak." Abuela Natividad. The storm rolled in slow and dry, not rain but wind, thick gusts that tugged at the roof shingles and kicked up dust until the sky turned a strange gray yellow. Maria stood by the doorway, with her shawl clutched tight, watching the clouds swirl over the mesa. She could feel the air shift in her bones. The children were inside playing quietly with shells and pebbles, pretending they were coins and jewels. Isela had tied a string of old buttons around her wrist, like a bracelet, her voice rising in made-up songs that cracked at the high notes. Maria should have felt at ease. The harvest patch was coming in strong. The creek was still running. James had brought flour and a new pair of shoes for Tomas 2 days earlier, along with a bucket of blackberries that had stained the boy's mouth purple for a full morning. But her stomach hadn't settled. Not since yesterday. Not since the letter came. Abuela had delivered it creased-handled too many times. It was from Ignacio's cousin in Las Cruces. A short note written in blunt strokes. "The debtors are still looking. They've started asking about you again. Someone said they saw you near San Isidro. You should keep moving. I can't protect you from here." Maria folded the paper and hid it in her shawl. She hadn't told the children. Not yet. She hadn't told James either. That night she boiled the last of the yarrow and tried to sleep, but the wind slapped against the shack like fists. She lay awake listening to the storm carry voices she didn't want to remember. Ignacio shouting across a fire. Men with bitter eyes and louder guns. The cracking snap of someone's boot heel too close behind. She woke before dawn, cold sweat on her neck. She had to leave. Again. Elias found her out by the creek, kneeling over the wash basin, like it held answers. The morning light was flat, the kind that makes everything feel still before it starts. "Callahan wants to see you," he said. Maria didn't lift her head. "Why?" Said he wants to talk. He never talks. "Well," Elias said, kneeling beside her. "Maybe he's figured out it's time he did." She looked over at him. His weathered face was lined with dust and quiet patience. "I got a letter," she said finally. Elias waited. "Trouble's coming. Not today. Maybe not tomorrow. But it's on its way." His brow furrowed. "You sure I've run long enough to know when the ground's getting soft under me?" Elias took off his hat and ran a hand through his hair. "You're thinking of leaving. I'm thinking I don't want the children to see what comes after staying too long." He was quiet for a beat. Then he said, "Maybe talk to the boss first." Maria stood drying her hands. "If he wants words, I'll give him the truth." James stood by the paddock fence watching the horses move slow through the morning haze. When Maria approached, he didn't turn. Just said, "Figured you'd come." She stopped a few paces back. "You asked for me." He nodded. "Something's been sitting on me for days. Figured if I didn't say it now, I wouldn't say it at all." She waited. "I don't sleep much," he said. "Since Victoria." "I keep hearing the last words," she said. "Not about the boys. Not about heaven." She told me not to shut myself off. He turned to face her. And I did. I shut every door, every window, even to myself. Maria's voice was soft. "I know that kind of silence." James nodded. "Then you'll understand why I keep coming down that hill. Why I bring lemons and nails and flour." She gave a small smile. "It's not just about kindness, is it?" "No," he said. "It's about remembering who I was before the pain swallowed everything." He looked away, jaw tight. "I'm not asking for anything from you. I know your life's been hard. I know you're still carrying weight I can't see." He paused. "I just wanted you to know, if you stay, you'd be welcome." The words landed between them like something fragile. Maria looked toward the hills. The wind had died down, but the sky was still uneasy. "I got a letter yesterday," she said, "from someone who knows where I came from." James tensed. "There's a man in Las Cruces. Ignacio owed him money before he died. I think he's looking for me. For the children." "What kind of man? The kind who doesn't ask twice?" James stared at her eyes, darkening. "I've survived worse," she said, "but I won't wait for it to find us here." He stepped forward. "You don't have to run." "You think I haven't heard that before?" Her voice cracked, but only a little. "Every time I stop, someone tells me it's safe, and every time it isn't." James clenched his fists. "You're not alone anymore." Maria's eyes shimmered. "That's what scares me most." The silence stretched heavy as thunder. Then James said quietly, "Let me help. I don't want blood on your land." "It's already there," he said. "Years of it. But maybe something good can grow from it now." Maria looked down at her hands. "It's not just about me. It's the children." "I know." He stepped closer. "You said you came here to survive. Maybe now it's time to live." Later, Abuela sat beside the hearth in the shack, sipping warm chamomile tea from a cracked mug. Maria paced restless. "I told him," she said, "about the letter, about the debt, about everything." Abuela raised an eyebrow. "And he said I could stay." Abuela smiled. Then he's more foolish than I thought. And maybe braver, too. Maria stopped. What if it brings danger to him to the ranch? Abuela set down her mug with a soft clink. Sometimes all a man has left to give is the truth he never dared speak, she said. And sometimes a woman has to decide whether to believe him. Maria sat down, her shoulders sagging. I'm tired of running. Then stop, Abuela said simply. You've earned the right to choose peace. Outside, the wind had settled. The sky was clearing strips of blue cutting through the clouded mess. Maria stood and walked to the door. The land stretched out before her, quiet, familiar, still scarred, but no longer empty, no longer silent. Behind her, the children laughed. Ahead, the horizon waited. And for the first time in years, she wasn't afraid to meet it. Some debts are paid in blood, but the worst ones keep collecting pieces of your soul. Ignacio's letter. The morning came without ceremony. A sky the color of bone, no wind, no birdsong, just a heavy stillness that pressed against the shack like a warning. Maria stirred the coals with a stick, the embers glowing low and slow. She hadn't slept. Her hands moved through habit, but her mind hadn't quieted since James's words the day before. You don't have to run. That should have brought her comfort. It didn't. Not when the past had a habit of catching up even in places that felt safe. Especially then. She poured warm water into a tin basin and began scrubbing the children's clothes. Tomas and Isela were still curled up on their mat, soft breaths rising and falling. They'd grown stronger these last weeks, sun on their skin, food in their bellies, laughter returning like something rediscovered. It made her chest ache to know she might tear it all away. A rustle by the trees drew her eyes. A rider. Maria's heart clenched before she even made out the face. The man dismounted like he owned the ground. His coat was travel-stained but expensive. His boots were polished. His eyes were sharp and empty. She knew that look. She stood tall, drying her hands on her skirt as he approached. "Señora Ortega," he said smoothly, removing his hat. "Been a long trail." Her mouth was dry. "What do you want?" He smiled, showing teeth with no warmth behind them. "Let's not pretend. Ignacio died owing, and debts don't disappear just because a man does. I have nothing." He tilted his head, slow and deliberate. "You have land now. A roof. I hear Callahan's taken a shine to you." She flinched. He noticed. "I'm not here to cause trouble," he said. "Just here to collect. You pay what's owed and I leave. You refuse. Well, life gets unpleasant. You remember how fast unpleasant comes, don't you?" Maria stepped forward, fury burning under her skin. "This isn't mine. It's his land. You bring your threats to his doorstep if you're so sure." The man smirked. "Maybe I will." He turned back toward his horse, then paused. "You've got 2 days. I don't get payment, I come back. And I don't knock next time." He rode off, dust trailing behind him like a curse. Elias was in the corral when Maria arrived, breath-tight skirt dusted with dried grass. He knew trouble when he saw it walking. "What happened, James?" she said. "I need him now." He dropped the reins and didn't ask another question. Inside the main house, James sat at the dining table with a ledger open. He looked up the moment Maria stepped in, her face pale, lips tight. "He came," she said. "The man Ignacio owed. He found me." James stood slowly. "What did he say that I owe him?" "That he'll be back. In 2 days." James looked at Elias, who gave a grim nod. Maria added, "He knew about you. Said you'd taken a shine to me. James's jaw twitched. Did he touch you? No. Did he threaten the children? Maria looked down. Not directly, but he didn't have to. James crossed the room, grabbed his coat, and threw open the door. Where are you going? Maria asked. He didn't look back. To end this. The saloon in San Isidro hadn't changed since the war. Same warped bar, same smoke-choked corners. The man was easy to find. James spotted him at a poker table near the back, his boots up, a drink in his hand. Callahan walked up and knocked the glass over with the back of his hand. You rode onto my land. The man looked up, lips curling. Ah, the landlord. Come to protect your little squatter. You want a debt collected, you speak to me. Not a woman raising children. I don't deal with middlemen. James leaned in close. That woman's under my roof. Her children are under my protection. You want to collect something? Try me. The man's hand drifted to his coat. James was faster. The revolver clicked against the underside of the table. Loud. Final. The saloon went quiet. I got law on my side, the man hissed. You've got cowards and dust. That's all. The man sneered. This ain't over. James stared him down. No. But it'll be the last time you say her name. He backed away slowly, never lowering the gun. Outside, the wind had picked up again. The smell of rain hung heavy in the air. James mounted his horse and rode home fast, hoping he hadn't just bought peace with a war. That night, Maria sat alone by the fire, Ignacio's letter in her hand. The one she'd never shown anyone. The one he'd written before the accident, before the debt collectors, before the fear. I did wrong by you. Tried to be bigger than I was. I thought if I worked hard enough, bet just right, we could have more. But I brought ruin instead. I'm sorry. If I'm gone, take the children. Run far. But don't forget who you are. You're not built to kneel. You're made to rise. She traced the words again and again, until her fingers smudged the ink. When James returned, his boots heavy with dried mud, he stood in the doorway like a man coming home after a storm. It's done, he said. She folded the letter and met his eyes. Are you sure? No. But I said what I had to. And if he comes back, James stepped closer. Then he'll learn what happens when a man comes for something that was never his. She didn't speak. She just stood there looking at him, all the weight of years between them. Then for the first time she let herself rest her forehead against his chest. Not to lean, not to fall. Just to breathe. He didn't move, didn't rush it. He stood there with her, letting the fire crackle and the night hold them both. Some debts weren't paid in coin or in blood. Some were paid in standing your ground, even when your legs shook. And in the quiet that followed, something stronger than fear began to take root. People talk about the land like it's just dirt and fences, but it remembers. Every kindness, every cruelty. Elias Romero. The land had gone quiet again. Not with fear, but with the slow stillness that comes after a wound stops bleeding. The dust had settled from the visit, the threats, the standoff. But something in the air had shifted. Heavier. Truer. Maria felt it in the way the wind moved through the cottonwoods, in the way the horses stood more alert at dusk. Even the creek ran with a sharper sound, like it was listening. She moved through her day with purpose. The beans needed shelling. The herbs needed cutting. The children had chores, gathering eggs from the coop, carrying water brushing the mare that still favored her left hind leg. Life continued. But Maria knew peace like this was never a promise. Just a pause. That afternoon, Elias came down from the barn with a pail in one hand and a coil of rope in the other. He dropped them by the fence and tipped his hat toward her. "You free for a walk?" he asked. She raised a brow. "Walk or work?" he grinned. "Little of both." She nodded, wiping her hands on a cloth and calling to Tomas to watch Isela for an hour. Elias led her toward the western ridge past the grove where old fence posts leaned like tired bones. The trail curved gently, and the air grew cooler beneath the shade of a rocky outcrop. Wild lupine swayed in the grass. The hills rolled out in silence. "You remember when you first came?" he asked. "I remember every step," she said. "You were all elbows and fire, ready to bite if anyone got close." Maria smiled, faint and sad. "I was scared." "Still are," he said. "Just less." They walked a while without talking. Callahan Elias said finally, "He's different since you came. I'm not trying to change him. I know. That's why it's working." They reached a high rise that looked out over the lower pastures. Below the shack stood like a dot against the land smoke curling from its chimney. The horses were just specks grazing in loose groups. Elias sat on a flat stone and pulled out a flask. He offered it. Maria shook her head. "I seen a lot of men," he said. "War changed them. Greed changed them. Loss hollowed most of them out." He looked at her directly. "But the land remembers. It keeps record. You plant sorrow here, it grows wild and hard. You plant tenderness, maybe it takes longer, but it roots deeper." She nodded slowly, letting that sit. "You think that's what he's doing?" she asked. "Planting something good, I think he forgot he even could. Until you reminded him." The wind picked up, brushing her cheek like a hand. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Elias nodded. "Why did you stay after everything? After his wife? The loss? The silence?" He rubbed the brim of his hat between his palms. "Because he didn't throw me away when he could have. Because when I was busted up and half dying from a bullet, the war left behind, he hauled me out of the canyon with his own damn hands. Because he's not just what you see when he doesn't talk." Maria looked down at the valley. "I don't know if I belong here." Too late to wonder that Elias said gently, "You've already changed the story this place was telling." That evening, James came to the shack with something wrapped in canvas under his arm. Maria was by the herb rack hanging a bundle of dried sage. Isela ran to the door when she saw him. He crouched to meet her, pulled a small wooden whistle from his pocket, and handed it to her. "For you," he said. "Carved it myself." Isela blew it once. It squeaked like a startled bird. Maria smiled. "You'll regret that by nightfall." "I already do," James muttered. He stepped inside, nodding to the children before turning to her. "I have something for you." He laid the bundle on the table and unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a book, worn leather cover, edges softened by time. She recognized the script. "Medicinal Plants of the Borderlands." Her breath caught. "This was Victoria's," he said. "She studied from it when we first came here. I thought it should be used again." Maria ran her fingers over the cover. "You're sure I kept it closed too long?" She swallowed hard. "Thank you." They stood there for a moment in the hush. Then James asked, "Will you come with me tomorrow? Where there's a spring?" tucked into the foothills past the East Ridge. She used to say it was the heart of this land. Maria studied his face. All right. The next day, she rode behind him on Elias's old mule the children left in Abuela's care. The trail narrowed as they climbed. Sagebrush gave way to pine. The air turned crisp. When they reached the spring, Maria stared in wonder. Water poured gently from between two mossy rocks, filling a clear pool shaded by overhanging trees. It was quiet here, sacred. James dismounted and stepped toward the edge. We used to come here every year. She'd collect wild mint, soak her feet in the water, laugh like the world couldn't touch her. Maria knelt and dipped her fingers in the spring. The water was cold, pure. It tasted like stone and memory. She died too early, James said, but so much of her is still here. I thought it would all fade without her, but it didn't. It just changed form. Maria stood beside him. It always does. He looked at her eyes, tired but clear. I don't want to forget her, but I don't want to keep living in a house that's only filled with echoes. You don't have to choose, Maria said quietly. Memory and new beginnings, they can sit side by side, if you let them. James reached out, then hesitant, but sure, and took her hand. And there, by the spring that remembered laughter, with the scent of pine and wild mint in the air, Maria let herself believe that maybe healing didn't always have to mean leaving. Sometimes it meant staying rooted and letting the land remember for you. You don't build a home by drawing lines in the dirt. You build it by choosing who you stand beside when the wind comes. Maria Ortega, the wind changed again. It came in from the southeast this time, dry and fast, carrying with it a kind of weight that pressed against the skin. Maria felt it the moment she stepped out to collect the laundry. A silence deeper than stillness, like the land was holding its breath. The animals were restless. The chickens pecked near the coop but didn't wander. Even the old mare wouldn't lift her head from the trough. She watched the horizon like something was coming. By noon, the sky had turned a dull yellow gray. The light sat strange on the fields, bending shadows, pulling them long. The scent of heat and metal settled in the back of Maria's throat. James hadn't returned from town yet. He'd gone that morning to pick up supplies, new shoes for Isela, coffee sugar, a few bolts of cloth from the trading post. He was supposed to be back by mid-afternoon, but the sun dipped low and there was no sign of his horse on the ridge. Maria didn't like it. She told herself it was nothing. Roads took time. Wagons broke. Men lingered in stores. Still, her fingers wouldn't stop trembling as she twisted mint leaves into bundles on the porch. The children sensed it too. Tomas was quiet. Isela asked 3 times if they were going to Papa James's big house for supper. When dusk came and still no sign, Maria put on her boots and walked to the barn. Elias was inside, rubbing down a horse that wouldn't stand still. He's late, she said. Elias looked up, his eyes already tight. I know. You feel it too, whole damn land feels it. Maria stood in silence, watching the horse's flanks rise and fall. Do you think it's him? She asked finally. The man from Las Cruces. Elias didn't answer right away. Then I wouldn't put it past him. Bastard looked like he'd spit on your grave and charge extra for the rope. Her stomach clenched. I need to go, Elias grabbed her arm before she could turn. No. You don't ride out in the dark. That's how people vanish. He could be hurt, or he could be buying sugar and flirting with the store clerk. She looked him dead in the eye. You don't believe that? He sighed, releasing her. Fine. But I'm going with you. They left the children with Abuela, who said nothing but handed Maria a rosary she'd worn thin over 20 years of prayers. Then she kissed her forehead, like she used to when Maria was a girl, hiding bruises she wouldn't explain. They rode hard toward San Isidro, dust kicking up behind them like a ghost too close. The trail was quiet. Too quiet. When they reached the fork leading into town, they found the wagon turned sideways in the ditch. One of the rear wheels cracked. A bag of flour split open on the ground like blood. James was gone. No note. No tracks but the ones left by dragging boots and hooves. Elias crouched low, examining the prints. 2 horses, one heavier. James was on foot. Maria felt like her chest had turned to stone. They took him. Elias stood. They're not local. I'd bet a year's wages they came from the canyon route. Maria's voice was low, steady. Then that's where we go. You're not thinking clear. I'm thinking exactly clear. He stood for me. Now I stand for him. They followed the canyon trail, narrow and twisting, through rock and thorn brush. The moon was a pale coin overhead, flickering between clouds. At a sharp bend, they spotted firelight. A small camp tucked beneath a ledge. 2 figures sat by the flames. One tied, one pacing. Maria slid from the saddle before Elias could stop her, moving silent along the ridge until she could see clearly. James was slumped against a tree, hands bound. His face was bruised, lips split, but his eyes were open, sharp, and defiant. The other man stood by the fire with a rifle slung over his shoulder. The collector. He was talking low and bitter. Thought you could embarrass me. Thought you could chase me off with your damn rancher pride. You're just another fool hiding behind fences. James said nothing. The man stepped closer. She's got fire. I'll give her that. Would have been easier if she'd just handed the land over. But no, had to get soft over her, didn't you? James coughed. You touch her, you won't leave this canyon. The man laughed. Who's gonna stop me, you? No, said Maria, stepping from the shadows. Me. The man spun, shocked. He didn't get a shot off. Elias was faster, knocking the rifle from his hands with a crack of wood against bone. The collector hit the ground hard. Maria rushed to James, cutting the ropes with Elias's knife. He winced as she helped him sit up. Thought you were at home, he rasped. I was, she said, but I chose where I stand. James looked at her, something like awe in his eyes. You came for me. Of course I did. Behind them, Elias dragged the collector to his feet. We can leave him to the sheriff in San Isidro. Let him explain why he's got half the county's threats in his pocket. James leaned on Maria to stand. Let's go home. Dawn cracked across the sky as they returned to the ranch. The children were asleep when they arrived, the coals in the hearth still warm. Abuela rose from her chair without a word, took one look at James, and nodded once before disappearing into the kitchen to make broth. Maria helped James to the bed in the corner. She cleaned his wounds in silence. His hand found hers when she finished. You didn't have to come, he whispered. She met his eyes. I did. You saved my life. No, she said softly. You gave it meaning. I just refused to let anyone take it away. Outside, the sun broke clean over the horizon. Inside, the world had shifted again, but this time it was in their favor. And in the silence that followed, a home stood stronger than any line ever drawn in the dirt. Love ain't the fireworks. It's who stays when everything's quiet, when it's just work and weather and days you can't name. Abuela Natividad. The days that followed moved slow and full, like the thick heat of late summer pressing in from every side. James healed in fits and starts. His ribs ached, his jaw stiff when he spoke, but he walked on his own by the second morning and refused help by the third. Maria watched him closely, though she said little. The bruises on his face faded into shadows, but the way he looked at her didn't. Something in his eyes had settled like a man who finally stopped waiting for the next tragedy and started choosing what to hold. She made tea from willow bark and comfrey for his pain. He only complained once, and after that drank it with a nod, even when it tasted like mud. In the quiet hours, he sat with the children on the porch, carving a new whistle for Isela, and teaching Tomas how to wind rope. The sound of them together, easy, steady, real, filled the air like a hymn. Abuela said little, though her hands worked faster than ever, mending seams, preparing preserves, lighting candles at dusk without saying why. The land, too, softened. Rain came in small bursts. The creek ran cooler. The beanstalks thickened. There were fewer wasps, fewer flies. It was the kind of quiet that used to make Maria uneasy. But now it felt earned. One evening after the children had gone to bed, James came to the shack with a basket of apples and a small wrapped parcel. "Figured we could trade," he said, handing it to her. She unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a length of deep blue cotton, with faint white embroidery along the edges, delicate but handmade. "It's from Las Trampas," he said. "One of the old weavers." Maria ran her fingers over the fabric. "It's beautiful. You'll make something from it." "You always do." She looked at him. "And what do you want in return?" He smiled, quiet and sure. "Dinner." She raised a brow. He added, "At my table. With me. No debts. No titles. Just you." The wind brushed the curtain. A moth tapped against the lantern glass. Maria set the fabric down. All right. The house still held shadows, but they'd changed shape. Maria wore the blue cotton as a wrap around her shoulders, her hair loosely braided. The children followed behind her like ducklings as they entered the main house. The table was set with clay plates and mismatched silverware. Elias had roasted a hen, and Abuela had made biscuits with butter and honey. A peach pie waited in the kitchen, barely holding together. They ate without ceremony. Just laughter, hands passing bowls, Isela dropping crumbs on the floor, and Tomas pretending to be a ranch foreman. James sat at the head of the table, eyes soft as he watched it all unfold. When the plates were cleared and the children were curled up on a rug near the fire, Abuela stood, wiped her hands, and kissed the top of Maria's head. "I'm going to bed," she said. "But don't think I don't see what's happening." Maria laughed. "What's that?" Abuela raised an eyebrow. "A house remembering it's allowed to feel alive." Elias followed with a wink and a pat on James's shoulder. Then it was just the two of them, the fire crackling low and the weight of years between them finally lifting. James reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. "I don't want to make this harder than it needs to be." Maria's voice was soft. "Then don't." "I was afraid to love again," he admitted. "Thought it'd be disloyal to the past. But I see you here with your fire and your grace, and I think maybe it's not about replacing what was lost. Maybe it's about honoring it by living better now." She met his gaze. "Love ain't betrayal. It's memory with a heartbeat." He leaned forward, kissed the back of her hand. They didn't say the words. They didn't need to. It was already in the way they breathed near each other, in the way she set her tea where he could reach it, in the way he adjusted the lamp so the light didn't bother her eyes, in the way the silence between them wasn't empty but whole. The next morning they rode the eastern trail with the children packed in wool blankets between them. The sun was soft, rising slow over the ridge, and the world looked golden and open. They reached a field near the far side of the ranch, once overgrown now, half cleared. James dismounted and walked it, kicking at the earth with his boot. "Good soil here," he said. "Could grow corn or squash." Maria joined him, her fingers brushing the wild stalks. "Or lavender." He grinned. "You want a lavender field, I want something that smells like peace." Tomas ran past, chasing a jackrabbit. Isela squealed behind him. James turned toward her. "Let's plant it together. Start something of our own." Maria felt the sun on her face, the steady breath of the land beneath her feet, the quiet hum of something old giving way to something new. "Then let's begin," she said. And together they knelt in the dirt, their hands side by side, no longer surviving, but growing. Peace isn't the absence of storms, it's having a place to come home to when they pass. Maria Ortega, the scent of crushed lavender clung to Maria's fingers as she leaned over the newly turned soil. Rows of small seedlings dotted the earth, tender green against the rich brown. The morning sun had barely cleared the mountains, casting long shadows across the field, but the work had already begun. Tomas ran water between the rows with careful hands, his brow furrowed in concentration. Isela followed behind, with a basket collecting the tiny weeds that had sprung up overnight. Their laughter carried across the field like birdsong. Maria sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her neck. She could feel the good ache of labor deep in her bones, the kind that meant something was being built, not just endured. Behind her, James approached with 2 tin cups in hand. He offered one, and she drank. The water was cold, touched with mint. "They're working hard," he said, nodding toward the children. "They're proud of it," she replied. "Feels like it belongs to them." He smiled. "It does." They stood together in the stillness, watching the light shift across the valley. The mountains held their silence like old secrets, the land unfolding in every direction, alive and whole. The lavender patch was just the beginning. To the west, James had cleared another field where corn would go in next month. The coop had new hens. The fence had been mended in 3 places. Life had resumed not as a return to something lost, but as something chosen. And still, Maria never forgot. That kind of peace came with memory, not without it. Abuela Natividad's hands had slowed, but her mind remained sharp. She sat in the shade most afternoons now, a woven fan in her lap, watching the rhythms of the ranch unfold. Sometimes she told stories from her girlhood in Durango. Sometimes she simply hummed old songs no one else remembered. One afternoon, as Maria folded laundry on the porch, Abuela motioned her over. "You've changed this place," she said. "Even the land feels it." Maria smiled. "I think it changed me too." Abuela leaned forward, eyes glinting. "That man loves you. Deep, quiet, like roots." Maria looked toward the barn where James worked with Elias repairing a wagon wheel. "I know," she said softly. "What are you waiting for?" Maria hesitated. "I'm not sure it's fear anymore. Maybe just learning to trust stillness." Abuela nodded slowly. "Stillness ain't silence, and it ain't stuck. It's rest. And rest is holy." Later that evening, Maria sat beside James as the sky turned violet. The porch creaked beneath their chairs, and the smell of warm earth clung to the wind. He reached for her hand, fingers curling around hers with the kind of ease that had taken months to grow. "I used to think peace meant forgetting," he said, "that maybe I had to bury all the grief to start again." And now she asked, "Now I think peace means letting it walk beside me. Not ahead, not behind. Just there." She leaned into him. "I never thought I'd have this, not again." "You do," he said. "We do." They married in late summer. It was simple. No priest, no papers. Just a circle of people who'd carried one another through fire and wind. Elias hammered a bell to the barn door to ring in the day. Abuela wore her best shawl and tied lavender into Maria's braid. Tomas stood tall, proud, to hold a new set of reins gifted by James. Isela scattered flower petals with both fists and laughed as they floated in the breeze. They stood beneath the big cottonwood by the creek, James in a clean shirt that didn't quite fit Maria barefoot in the warm grass. He took her hands, and they spoke the words they'd written together. No promises of forever, just choices daily, quiet and real. "I choose you, James," said voice low and sure, with the grief, the joy, and the days in between. "I choose you," Maria answered, "not because I need saving, but because you saw me whole and I stayed." They kissed once, soft and deep. The cheers that followed echoed through the valley. The season turned. The lavender bloomed. Word of the ranch's new strength reached the town slowly. The man from Las Cruces never returned, maybe chased off by the law, maybe swallowed by his own debts. No one missed him. The ranch thrived in its own way, not large, not rich, but alive. The harvests came in enough to feed and trade. The land grew generous again. Maria taught the children how to grind herbs, how to read the signs in the sky. James taught them how to ride, how to build, how to mend. At night, they read aloud by lantern. Stories about rivers and stars and people who didn't give up. Maria would often rise before the sun, standing at the edge of the lavender rose, with a cup of warm tea in her hands, the light brushing her face. She'd close her eyes and listen to the land, to the breath of her family behind her, to the quiet that was no longer hollow. One evening, as the first chill of autumn settled in, James found her in the kitchen, humming over a pot of stew. "You know," he said, stepping behind her, "we could build a bigger house. One with real rooms, a front parlor, maybe a little porch on the north side." She turned, wiping her hands on a cloth. "And why would we do that?" he grinned. "So I can watch you from more angles." She swatted his arm. "This shack's held storms and miracles. I think it'll hold us." He stepped close, pulling her into his arms. "I think you're right." Outside, the fireflies had returned. The night was soft and dark and full. Inside, two souls, once battered by life, now stood upright, no longer trembling. Maria laid her head against his chest, listening to the steady thrum of a heart that had almost given up, now beating full and strong. Peace wasn't something you found. It was something you built. Together.